Hey guys, Brent Pourciau, TopVelocity.net. I thought we'd have fun with Jimmy here, my skeleton, and we'd go over the challenges of a back leg drive anatomically. And this is what a lot of the challenges that guys run into when they realize they don't use their lower halves well and they learn what it takes to use the lower half. We're going to mainly focus in the drive hip anatomy here. So we can see here's the femur and the femur head going into the socket. Now if we were standing up, the dog leg here, the tip here would be pushing vertical, right? And then the ball and socket right there would be inside the fossa, and it would be in a bone-on-bone position to support weight, right? So when you're standing up, you have some good mechanical leverage just in the bone-on-bone position. The problem is when we tap into our drive leg as pitchers, we have to move what we call forward and down at the same rate so we can get flexion in the leg, because when we get flexion in these joints, we can create extension, which creates force production. We also get in positions where we can create better rotation. We get 90-degree angles like this, create more torque forces in rotation. So getting into a good forward and down position as you're coming out of your leg lift gives you a mechanical leverage on this rubber to accelerate momentum towards the target. But here's the challenges. When you get to this position, you can see that there's no really bone-on-bone support for the weight. As far as the end of the femur, it's more freely floating now. It's not jammed up under there where I can push up into the pelvis bone. It's more pulled away because the torsion in the femur's turned out. So it's kind of now floating out here. It can move a lot more freely. So what happens is the musculature has to now engage to hold the weight of the body. And you're sitting on one leg at this point. So now there's not two hips helping here because this leg's floating. It's this one hip that doesn't have the bone-on-bone leverage for holding weight. It's just having to squeeze the muscles around that hip to try to stabilize all the body weight, and that's what gets very difficult. So a lot of kids can't move forward and down the same rate because they don't have the strength in the hip capsule to support the weight, and basically they're just going to fall over if you put them in that position. The other challenge is posture. If I lose my pelvis position, typically when the pelvis collapses, it collapses anterior, it tips forward, because what's happening is the abs are shutting off, the glute is shutting off, and it's just kind of collapsing. It's kind of where we go when we just relax, right? So if this starts tipping forward, then it makes it even harder to have any mobility here. The farther this pelvis goes forward, the more the bone is going to hit the femur bone here, and it's going to restrict mobility, specifically mobility for the leg to go forward, right? So you get to the point where if the pelvis comes down any farther in that tilt, then the bone starts getting pushed down, and then you see the knee collapsing. So the key here is not only just stabilizing the back hip in this position, but stabilizing the knee. We all know if the knee gets to this position, what's called a valgus position, it can't hold weight either. There's no bone-on-bone support here, where the tibia is going to be pushing force this way, and because that side is open, it just could potentially collapse that side. So we have to hold the knee in what's called external rotation, or put some torsion in the femur and external rotation to tighten this up and create stability. So now we have stability here, and then when we engage the hip, we have stability there. So if this pelvis keeps turning down, it'll push this femur down like this, and then this leg is going to collapse. So the pelvis orientation, if you're in a bad posture and an anterior pelvic tilt, that's going to cause you to be in these collapsed femur positions, which we see a lot of pitchers where their knees quickly start going down. And that's because two things is probably happening. They're rotating early, and their pelvis is collapsing forward, and that's collapsing their knee and collapsing their leg, and everything's just going to go early. So to prevent that, we have to keep posture, we have to keep our hips up, we have to keep strong engagement of the musculature of the hip, we have to keep torsion in the knee, and then that gives us stability here to create force, which is going to be the rotational force as we turn the femur over, as we go into rotation, and the extension force as the leg pushes off the rubber to push the hip around, just like that, right? So if we can't get into that stable torsion, single leg position here, and our posture isn't good, then we're not going to be able to support that, and we're going to see the collapsing leg, the knee collapsing down, the femur staying down, and not able to keep it up and out. So just know that the more neutral your hip is, the more movement you have in the hip, which we need because we got to get all this rotational movement and this extension movement to create force through the leg, through the ground, through the hip, and up the chain. And because we have all that extra movement, because the hip's in a good neutral position and the body, we've moved forward and down the same rate, we have to have the strength in the external rotators, the internal rotators, the groin, the abductors, to stabilize and hold the weight of the body in this position, so then we can go and add the force. And if we don't have stability just to hold the body, we're not going to have stability to push all this force forward through the hip without the hip wanting to dislocate, right? So I hope this video just helps you understand the challenges we face as pitchers to really engage the lower half. The amount of strength we have to have in the hip capsule, the amount of strength we have to create good posture, the amount of strength we have to hold the femur externally to create torsion to support the knee stability. And then you could get all the way into the foot, the amount of strength we have to have in the foot, which is the foundation of all this, to create that stability, and then as the femur internally rotates, to then push and kick and accelerate forces through there. It's really, really impressive, and it takes an elite athlete to be able to do this, and it's why most pitchers struggle to use their lower half. And hopefully the point of watching the videos is you can see what it really takes, and that's why it's going to take mobility training, strength and conditioning, and then mechanics training to get into these positions and learn how to move freely and create force and power through them. We could go more into pitchers that have hip capsule issues. They have small heads to the femur, which restrict mobility. But the point is the less mobility you have in the hip, the better and more perfect you have to be at delaying rotation, counter-rotating the hip, moving perfectly forward down at the same rate, really, really getting strong to be able to stabilize a really, end of range mobility position. So basically all these components are even more important the less hip less mobility you have based on your anatomy and how you're built in your hip capsule. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some insight. If you have any questions, please post them below. I'd love to answer your questions.